is there going. It's good to see Miss Delarose back. She's been down with the junk for a while. Good to see her back up and around. Yes, this is Valentine's weekend. Yesterday was the actual day. But a lot of people take the opportunity to... Actually, it's a makeup day for a lot of guys that just forgot about it yesterday, I think. You know, get a do-over, get a mulligan, if you will. So how do you say I love you? How do you tell her that you love her? You know, some of us are worse at it than others are. Let's be honest. You know, it's not so simple when you're a guy. Guys, am I right? I mean, some of you might be into all this stuff, but most of us, you know, and you can try to say I love you with a gift, but as you see from the video, sometimes we can mess up big time. Especially when you stray outside the secure world of perfume and flowers and things like that. Of course, our youth are sponsoring the Valentine banquet this evening. And the ladies are like, oh, that's wonderful. It's a romantic time that we can have together. Guys are like, yeah, steak. That's what we're thinking about. There was one good old boy that asked his friend whether he bought his wife anything for Valentine's Day. And he said, yes, I did. I bought her a bag and a belt. And he said, well, that's nice. I hope she appreciates the gift. And he says, I do too. Because maybe it'll make the vacuum cleaner work a little bit better now. You know, the worst I've ever seen, gift I've ever personally known of, was one guy that gave his wife, is basically a new bride, some bathroom scales. You know, it's a practical gift, let's be honest about it. But not only was it practical, it implies something that he did not mean to imply. It also reminds me of the story of the young lady that was, she wanted a sports car. And she didn't want to come around and say it, but she just hinted to her husband, I want something to go from 0 to 120 real fast. So he gave her some bathroom skills. Didn't work. So, it's hard to say sometimes how we feel, isn't it? But there is a universal expression of love, and that is the sacrifice. If you want someone to know that you love him or her, sacrifice. That's basically what the guys in the video are trying to do. They're sacrificing, trying to give up their time to come up with something. Sacrifice is the language of love. It is spoken in every country. And by the way, getting these things wrong, when you mess up, can have a carryover effect. There was one couple that got into a spat, and they were having to make a trip, and while they were driving along without speaking a word to each other, they came across a farm. And the husband had a shot that he wanted to get in on her. He looked over and he saw the cows and the hogs out there. And he just kind of smirked and looked at his wife and says, are those relatives of yours? She said, yeah, in-laws. Last couple of weeks we've been traveling down the Roman road. Our first stop was Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. The second stop last week was in Romans 6:23, talking about consequences, which says, for the wages of sin is death. And today we find ourselves looking at love, the human sacrifice. I want to ask you to stand and look in your Bibles in Romans chapter 5. Just 3 verses we're going to be looking at here. Romans chapter 5, beginning in verse 6. It says, you see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God, here's the key verse, verse 8, but God demonstrates His own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Thank you. You may be seated. God demonstrated His love in that while we were still sinners, Christ died. Now, what was that like? To get a feel of the Father's love in this, before we get deeper into our message, let me just kind of throw this out here to you. I want to talk to you about another dad. This is about one of those older dads who had wanted a son. And it was not until late in his life that the Lord blessed him with his only son. But then the Lord gave him this absurd and difficult demand. He said, I want you to sacrifice your son. In fact, the language that God used in the book of Genesis was very chilling. He said, take your son, your only son. Now, I will take just a minute here and walk in that old man's sandals here. For 3 days, this man and his son, they've been walking up the flat coastal plain of Philistia and going alongside the Mediterranean Sea. And they wove their way through the rolling hills of Judea until they came to the rugged terrain of the hill country. And then they snaked along the ravines until they came to an area that one day would be called Jerusalem. And at that time, it was just simply called Salem. And on one of those 7 hills that are there, this old man once offered a sacrifice to the king of Salem. And he was going back to that place. And this time he's going with his only son. The attendants were told to wait down below with their donkey. And you can imagine, you just kind of picture what's going on about the morning mist that hangs over like a blanket on that low valley. And this old man wants to get this finished as quickly as he possibly can. The thought about what he was being told to do by God made him nauseous, just sick in his stomach. And he stacks the kindling on the back of that boy. And together they start up that steep ravine. And it's a tough climb for a man his age. Rocks, briars, the sun beating down on them. A limb, I can imagine, snapping back and hurting him in the face. His ears are just burning with anger at this point. And he slips and a rock slices that thin skinned knee. And as they climb the steep hill, the sweat just starts pouring down. It's a tough climb. And already his legs are feeling like lead. His heart's beating heavier. His boy looks up at him with those brown eyes like a lamb. And he says, Papa, how much further? How many of us as parents have heard our children say, how much further? And just like us, his father said, just a little bit longer, son, just a little bit longer. But Papa, what about the sacrifice? He says, I see wood and I see the fire, but where's the lamb? Well, God will provide the lamb. Just keep going. He says, my heart is hurting. And finally they reach the top. And this old man gathers up stones. And his boy looks down that beautiful view that's down below them. In time, an altar is made there at the top. And the old man, I can imagine, just sick at his stomach, pulls out a binder cord and he walks toward his confused son. And in silence, he ties the boy's hands, the boy trusting his father. But Papa, what is this? I don't understand. And by now, tears are just pouring down the old man's face. And this made the boy even more nervous. And he says, Papa, why are you crying? Why are you tying my hands? This hurts. Please stop. And the father, the old man, his heart just breaking. He reaches down and he ties the boy's ankles together. And Papa, why are you doing this? Please stop. At this time, the boy is too powerless to run. And the old man strains to lift that boy and put him up on that altar. Papa, what is this? I don't understand. And his father's crying even more. Papa, why are you crying? Why are you doing this? You must stop this. You're scaring me. And without a word, the old man moves. And he does all this. He's got his sacrifice, his son, ready up on the altar. Why did you put me here, Papa? Where's the lamb we're supposed to be sacrificing? And the old man braces himself for the most difficult thing that he will ever do. Hoping for a miracle, he pulls a blade out from his robe. And steel flashes in the morning sun. And the little boy's brown eyes just widen with terror. Papa, please don't hurt me. And the blade rises in the air, almost as if it's in its own power. Papa, no! And those little lamb eyes close in anticipation of the blow that's about to be given to him. But the downstroke never occurs. The father and the son, from somewhere they hear, Abraham! Abraham! And the old man turns and there's an angel there with the news, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him, for now the Lord knows that you have not withheld anything from him. You have not withheld anything. You are willing to sacrifice your son. And then they hear the bleating of a ram that's caught in a thicket. The ropes come off the boy and they hold each other for what seems like eternity. They're sobbing, they're kissing each other. It's over. A lamb will sacrifice. Abraham gets to keep Isaac, his son, his only son. Now, why would God make him go through that? It seems almost sadistic. The Bible gives the answer. It's a test of faith. Abraham put God above everything else. Abraham passed the ultimate test. He really did love God more than anything. But don't you think this was more than a test? In the process of Abraham's journey into faith with God, he is showing us how we are to act as well. Because he himself would one day feel the same way, God would. What Abraham almost did on Moriah, God really did at Calvary, some 1,800 years later. The story was given so that we would feel his pain. That story was given to us so that we could fully appreciate the gift that God gave us. That he showed his love. That story was given for that purpose. You see, Romans 5:8 is the greatest single statement of love, I believe, that's in the Bible. This is a language we all understand. That God loved you so much that he would sacrifice his only son. That's how much he loves you. He didn't sacrifice time. He didn't sacrifice money. But his only son. It's right there. John 3:16. How does that verse affect you? What does it say to you? First thing, what we see is that it speaks to the severity of your sin. It speaks to the severity of your sin. A dermatologist issues a word of warning to those in our country. You know, we want to feel beautiful. You know, and too often we put too much time worshiping ourselves. I'm not saying that this is wrong. About what he's saying here. That, he's talking about people always wanting to have a suntan. That's okay, to a degree. But let's not go overboard with it. He says, you got to watch out. He says, today's deeply tanned beauties are tomorrow's wrinkled prunes. I remember when we were living in Tennessee when I was in high school. Our Royal Ambassadors, our young men's group, went for a camp out on one of the lakes in West Tennessee. And we spent a lot of time out there in the water, splashing around. And one of my friends noticed that I was starting to get red. And he says, you better watch out, you're going to get a burn. I said, no, I'm not worried about this. I was thinking I was going to get a tan. I'm going to get a nice tan. I was in high school, I was looking at the girls, and I wanted the girls to look at me. I'm going to have a nice tan. Well, after a while, it got to burning. And I had to get out of the water, and I was scalded. Well, while we were out there, we met some young men that were also on a camping trip, and they were from a nearby church. And as the evening wore on, they invited our group to come to their church to play some basketball. And I couldn't go because I couldn't move. I was hurting. I was about to scream. And so they all left without me. Now, I want to tell you something. It's not bragging. It was a fact back then. I was a pretty fair basketball player. I mean, I could shoot. I had some moves. Never had any hops. I couldn't get, you could slide a credit card up under me barely. That's about it, but I could shoot. But so they all go and they play basketball, and after a while, my friend David Harden, who's now a cardiologist in Memphis, comes back, he comes running up, and he said, "We lost by 2 points. If you had been there, we would have won." Double ouch. I could have played basketball. I could have been the hero. But I was worried about getting a tan. In thinking about sin is kind of like a suntan. It may look great today. It may be fun and exciting today, but tomorrow might be a different story. People will say, well, God will understand. God is loving and forgiving, and God will make an exception. You can mess up big time, and don't worry about it. You don't have to worry. This is Satan working in our heads. Don't worry about it. You don't even have to ask for forgiveness because God understands. Don't bet eternity on that. If God would simply wave it off, why would He let His Son die on the cross? Why would He do that? Grace doesn't say that. The grace of God does not say, well, look at old Tiny T down there. He's a pretty good old boy, a little bit chubby, but he's okay. He comes from a good family. I think I'll just let him slide. He don't have to worry about anything. I'm just going to let him go. And that's the idea that some have. But grace says sin is an unforgivable offense. But God's love is so great that the sinless would die for the sinner. God loved us so much that He would send His perfect Son, that if I would just simply ask for forgiveness and accept Him, He would forgive me. But too often, as we have stated before, that we want to put ourselves on the throne. We would prefer that God bow down to us. It doesn't work that way. We have to ask for forgiveness. It speaks to the severity of our sin. What else does this tell us? Well, it speaks to the tyranny of the law. There's a great story about Fiorello LaGuardia. The big airport in New York is now named after him. When he was mayor of New York City during the worst days of the Great Depression and into World War II, he was called by a lot of adoring New Yorkers as the Little Flower. He only stood about 5'4", and he always wore a carnation in his lapel. He was a colorful character. And he would get out and he would ride with the New York City Fire Department on calls. He would go with the police department when they were making raids and doing other things. And he would take entire orphanages to baseball games. And when the New York newspapers went on strike, he would go on the radio on Sunday mornings for the children. He would read the comics for that day. He was very much beloved. There was one very cold night in January of 1935. The mayor turned up at a night court that served the poorest ward of the city. LaGuardia had told the judge to go ahead and take the rest of the night off, that he would sit in for him on the bench. And within a few minutes, there was this tattered, ragged-looking old lady that came. She was brought before him, charged with stealing a loaf of bread. When he asked why she would do that, she explained. She said, my daughter's husband recently deserted her. Now my daughter is very sick, and I've got 2 grandchildren that are starving, and I didn't know what else to do, so I took the loaf of bread. But the shopkeeper refused to drop the charges. And he said, this is a very bad section of town, and if you let her go, it will make an example that anybody else can come in and do this. You need to make another example out of her, that you cannot do this. He said, and he stressed to the mayor, that is the law. And LaGuardia looked at the man and he said, ma'am, he's right. He said, I've got to punish you. That is the law. And before he could hardly even get the words out, he stood up, reached into his pocket. The fine was $10. He pulled out a $10 bill and he put it in his hat. He said, here's the $10 fine. And furthermore, he looked around He said, I'm going to fine everybody in this courtroom 50 cents because that you are living in a town where a person has to steal a loaf of bread to be able to feed their grandkids. So he passed that hat around. And the next day, the New York newspapers reported that $47.50 was turned over to this bewildered lady who had stolen a loaf of bread to feed her starving grandchildren. And 50 cents of that was even paid for by the man that refused to drop the charges. There were some 70 petty thieves, criminals that were in the courtroom that they had to pay 50 cents. People with traffic citations and New York City policemen that were in there. They all had the honor of the privilege of doing this. And whenever the money was taken and he told how much there was received, the mayor received a standing ovation from those people. Now, in a way, isn't that the way God is? I mean, not the part about charging everyone in the courtroom, because that's not going to happen. But the part about paying for her crime himself. And you listen again to LaGuardia's words. He says, the law makes no exceptions. Someone has to pay. And on that same mountain where Abraham nearly killed Isaac, Solomon built the temple some 900 years later on the exact same spot. Only one place the temple has ever been built was right there at Moriah, on the Temple Mount. And that altar from thereafter was flowing with blood. On the day they dedicated the temple, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep were slaughtered to atone for the sins of the people. The Bible says that without shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. So they shed blood, a lot of it. Now let me ask you this. How much blood is in an ox? I don't know. Could be a gallon or two. I'm just scatter shooting here. I don't know. How much blood is in a person? The ox, it had to be a lot. 22,000 gallons of blood are poured out on that one single day. How much blood in a sheep? I don't know, a quart or two. But what did they do with all that blood? The blood sacrifices continued until the temple was destroyed in AD 70. Now, isn't that interesting? God took away the blood sacrifice after Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. It was no longer needed, but for 1,000 more years, they slaughtered bulls and birds and goats and sheep. The law is relentless. Someone has to pay for sins. The death of those bulls and sheep was a picture of the one true sacrifice that was given for us at Calvary, that would eventually wipe the slate clean. But don't miss this. The law would not have it any other way. Somebody has to pay for our sins. What else does this speak of? It speaks of the sincerity of the love. Jesus stepped up and He did what we could not do for ourselves. He took our punishment. Dick Hilda said, love, and we'll read this to you. He said, love is a costly thing. He describes what he saw while working with the starving in Africa. Here's what he said. She was lying on the ground. In her arms, she held a tiny baby girl. As I put a cooked sweet potato into her outstretched hand, I wondered if she would live until morning. Her strength was almost gone, but her tired eyes acknowledged my gift. The sweet potato could help so little, but it was all I had. Taking a bite, she chewed it carefully. Then placing her mouth over her baby's mouth, she forced the soft, warm food into the tiny throat. Although the mother was starving, she used the entire potato to keep her baby alive. Exhausted from her effort, she dropped her head on the ground and closed her eyes. In a few minutes, the baby was asleep. I later learned that during the night, the mother's heart stopped, but her little girl lived. Love is a costly thing. I read that, I think, that's the love of God. But it isn't. Because many a parent will die for a child. But how many would just allow the child to die? God could have come down. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, His Son, God's Son, who was perfect, who never did anything wrong, willing to die for people like me. God could have said, I can't stand this. This is my son. And He could have stopped the whole thing. God's love is so great that He would allow His only Son to die. That's costly love. And that is love that was given to you this morning. Some of you probably have never known love like that. But here's our application. All your life you've wondered, but God loves you sacrificially. Sacrificially. He said it by giving the best gift. Jesus did. The best gift that He could offer. He gave Himself. Folks, whenever I look at this and I meditate on this, you know, I'm not a Valentine Grinch. That's fine, it's great. But we got to take it a step further to what Jesus did for us on the cross. You might have that special person in your life, I don't know. And you love him or her, that's great. But what Jesus did for us trumps everything. He loved me that much. He would die for me. I can't really fully grasp that because I know me. And He died for you as well. What have you done for Him? Please stand. Bow your heads and close your eyes.